So how do you read a box plot? A box plot actually isn't that difficult to comprehend. What a box plot is basically for is to represent your data and allow you to see where the majority of the data lies. And so what a box plot does is it splits your data up into 4 quartiles. And quartiles can be thought of just like quarters. In school, there are 4 quarters in the school year. In sports, typically there are 4 quarters to a game. A dollar is made up of 4 quarters, and that basically just means that you're splitting them up into fourths. And if you think about a quarter is worth 25 cents. So 25 cents is really 25% of a dollar. So each quarter is going to represent 25%. So each quartile will represent 25%. So how do you recognize the different quartiles? Well, the different quartiles would be right here. This is the first quarter. Quartile 1, which is 25% of the data. Then this box right here will be quartile 2. I'll put it up here. Quartile 2, which is 25% of the data. And then from quartile 2 to the next break will be quartile 3, which is another 25%. And then from the end of quartile 3 all the way to the end will be quartile 4, which is another 25%. And as you can see, 25, 50, 75, 100, the data should add up to be 100%. Now, there are some other labels that we need to recognize. The easiest thing to recognize is the minimum, which is right here. It's just the smallest point. That's the minimum. And then if that's the minimum is the lowest point, then the maximum would obviously be the largest point. Once you know the minimum and the maximum, then you should be able to recognize that if I'm talking about quarter 1 being right here, this is the end of quarter 1, which is called Q1. So this point right here, which would really be read right here, is called Q1. And if we go backwards, actually, the minimum for this data set in particular, if you just look below it, you can see that the minimum must be 4. Q1 is going to be at the end of quarter 1, which is right here, which you can see that is 8. Then the next line, if you just follow it down, you can see that it crosses the number line at 10. And this is called the median. So the median for this data set is at 10. You can think of it just like halftime. At the end of the second quarter, it's halftime. Half the game is passed. There's still half the game to be played. So the line in the middle of the box is called the median. And then the third quarter, this point right here, is going to be called Q3. And if you follow it down, you see it cross the number line at 11. So Q3 is 11. And again, at the end of the fourth quarter, at the max, if you follow it down, you can see that the max is 13. So now that we've done that, let's use that to answer the different questions that are given. So find the range of the data in the box plot. Well, we've already discovered that the minimum is here, which is 4, and the maximum is here, which is 13. The range is just the difference between the minimum and the maximum, or we usually say the maximum minus the minimum. So the range, if you do the maximum minus the minimum, then that would just be 13 minus 4, and that's just 9. So your range is just 9. So now we're being asked to find the interquartile range. But before we do that, I want to go ahead and make sure we have a good understanding. Again, my minimum is just the lowest point. I can follow it down. I can see that it's between 3 and 4. So my minimum is 3.5. My maximum is the next easy number to recognize. It's between 7 and 8. So my maximum is 7.5. My median is the line in the middle of the box, which is directly at 6. And then I have my quartiles. And remember, every time there's a separation, that's a quarter. So at the end of the first quarter is Q1. So Q1, if you follow that down, you can see it's between 5 and 6. And so that's going to be 5.5. And Q3, if you follow that straight down, that goes through at 7 at the end of the third quarter, because here's quarter 2 and here's quarter 3. So at the end of the third quarter, Q3 is 7. We learned last time that the range is the difference between 7.5 and 3.5, difference between the max and the minimum. But this question is asking for the interquartile range. So what would that look like? To find the interquartile range, all you have to do is subtract quartile 1 from quartile 3. So the IQR is just quartile 3, which is 7. We can see that here. 7 minus Q1, which is 5.5. And 7 minus 5.5 gives you 1.5. So my interquartile range would be 1.5. So here's another one. Find the median of the data in the box plot below. But before we do that, let's make sure we know the other bits of data. So what is my minimum? My minimum, straight down here, is 0. My maximum is 12. So I should know automatically that means that my range is the difference between 12 and 0. So 12 minus 0, which is 12. My median is a line in the middle of the box, which drops down to 4. So my median is 4. And then Q1, quartile 1, is at the end of the first quarter, which is right here. And that drops down at 2. And Q3 is at the end of the third quarter. So here's the second quarter. Here's a third quarter. So Q3 is at 6. And so what that means is the interquartile range is just 6 minus 2, which is 4. But at the end of the day, they only asked us for the median. And we discovered that already. The median was just the line in the middle of the box, which is 4. So my answer was 4. So now we're asked to find the range of this data. So again, just to make sure we're not missing anything, by now you should be able to recognize that my minimum is in between 3 and 4. So my minimum is 3.5. My maximum is 7.5. So my range is going to be the maximum minus the minimum. So 7.5 minus 3.5, which is 4. So I've already answered my question. My answer is 4. But to make sure that you've gotten a good handle of the other data that you should be able to find from this, at the end of quarter 1 will be quartile 1 or Q1, and Q1 is between 5 and 6, which would be 5.5. The median is in the middle of the box, and the middle of the box is lined up with 6. Quartile 3 is at the end of the first, second, third quarter. So that's right here, and that's 7. And since I already know my max, then I can just, to find my interquartile range, the IQR, I'm finding the difference between quartile 3 and quartile 1. So that's really just how wide is this box? And so that's 7 minus 5.5, and that's just 1.5. So a really good way to look at the interquartile range, this box right here represents the interquartile range. Let me clean that up a little bit for you. So again, this box right here represents the interquartile range. So whatever this number is here, 7 minus 5.5, that's the interquartile range. If they ask you for the range, that would just be the maximum minus the minimum. So those are really the only questions that they ask you that require math for the box plots right now. So we already answered our question though. The range is going to be the difference between the maximum, which is 7.5, minus the minimum, which is 3.5. So 7.5 minus 3.5 gives you 4. So that's it. At the end of the day, we've gone over all the different types of definitions that you're going to need for this skill. So watch it a couple times if you need to, and get to a point where you can identify the minimum, the maximum, the range, the median, quartile 1, quartile 3, and the interquartile range immediately. If you can do that, you'll be in good shape. Hope this helps. Let's get it done.